Hi there. You're listening to English Podcast for Beginners, your friendly guide to learning English step by step. Let's learn, practice, and grow together.
Welcome back to English Podcast for Beginners. Today's episode is all about a powerful skill, developing fluency through conversation practice. Nick and I are going to guide you through a natural, steady conversation that shows how fluency grows when you speak regularly, listen actively, and stay patient with yourself. So, let's begin our discussion.
Thanks, Alexa. I think a lot of learners underestimate how important consistent conversation is. They focus on grammar, vocabulary lists, or textbooks, but they don't actually talk. And without talking, fluency doesn't really develop. It's like wanting to learn how to swim, but never getting in the water.
Exactly. Conversation is the real practice, the place where everything comes together. And what's interesting is that you don't need complicated topics to start. Even simple conversations can build fluency. For example, talking about your day, your plans, your opinions, your experiences. These everyday topics allow your brain to build automatic responses in English.
And learners often worrying, thinking, what if I make mistakes? But mistakes are actually useful because they show you what to improve. When you speak, you discover gaps in your vocabulary or grammar, and that guides your learning. If you only study silently, you don't get that feedback.
True. And I think another important point is rhythm. When learners practice conversation, they build a natural rhythm in English. They learn when to pause, how to connect ideas, and how to express thoughts without translating. That rhythm is what makes speech sound confident and fluent.
Yes, rhythm shapes fluency. It's not just about knowing words, it's about moving through sentences smoothly. And the only way to develop that movement is by using English in real time. Even short daily conversations can make a big difference.
A lot of people also expect fluency to happen suddenly. But fluency is gradual. It develops through repeated exposure, repeated speaking, and repeated listening. The more conversations you join, the more automatic your English becomes.
And the good thing is, conversation practice doesn't need to be formal. You can practice with a friend, a language partner, a tutor, or even by speaking out loud to yourself. What matters is that you are producing English, not just absorbing it.
Right. And there's something very powerful about speaking aloud. When you speak, you activate different parts of your brain. You hear yourself, you process your own sentences, and you adjust your phrasing naturally. That process helps you think in English instead of translating word by word.
Thinking in English is one of the strongest signs of developing fluency. It happens when you stop planning every sentence and start responding naturally. And conversation is the best way to reach that stage because you're forced to react, not rehearse.
And let's talk about confidence too. Many learners hesitate because they feel nervous, but confidence grows when you practice regularly. Every time you complete a conversation, even a short one, your confidence increases. Over time, you start feeling more comfortable even in challenging topics.
Yes, and fluency and confidence feed each other. When you become more fluent, you feel more confident. When you feel more confident, you speak more, which builds fluency. It becomes a cycle of growth instead of fear.
Another thing we should highlight is the importance of listening during conversation. Fluency isn't only about speaking. When you listen to someone, you learn new structures, expressions, and patterns. You also learn how native speakers organize ideas.
Listening strengthens speaking. When you hear natural English frequently, your brain starts copying those patterns. That's why conversations with real people are so effective. You get real language inputs, not just textbook examples.
Also, learners should try not to overthink their sentences. If you're too focused on being perfect, you lose your natural flow. Fluency doesn't require perfection. It requires movement. It requires clarity. and it requires consistency.
Exactly. It's far better to speak with simple, clear sentences than to hesitate while searching for perfect grammar. Real communication is about connection, not perfection.
And I think that's one of the most freeing things about practicing English conversation. You realize that you don't have to sound like a native speaker. You just need to express your thoughts clearly and confidently.
Yes, and the more you practice, the more natural your English feels. It stops being something you study and becomes something you use. And that's the moment fluency starts to grow stronger and stronger.
So today's conversation is an example of how two people can develop fluency by exchanging ideas, speaking openly, and using real language. And we'll continue expanding this topic, exploring more techniques and sample conversations so learners can follow along and practice with us.
Absolutely. There's so much more to say about building fluency through conversation, and we'll go deeper into practical methods, real examples, and step-by-step improvements as we continue this session. One thing I really want learners to understand is that fluency grows when you stop worrying about sounding perfect and start focusing on expressing meaning. When you pay attention to meaning, your mind becomes more flexible. You start forming sentences faster, and your ideas flow more naturally.
Yes, focusing on meaning is powerful. For example, if you can't remember a specific word, you can explain the idea in another way. That skill, paraphrasing, is a huge part of fluency. Native speakers do it all the time, and when learners practice it, they become more adaptable and confident in conversations.
And adaptability matters because conversations are unpredictable. You don't always know what the other person will say. You don't always know the vocabulary they'll use. That uncertainty can feel uncomfortable at first, but it actually trains your brain to respond quickly in English.
Exactly. Every conversation teaches you something new. Maybe a new phrase. Maybe a new sentence structure. Maybe a new way to express agreement or disagreement. These small lessons add up. And one day you suddenly realize your English sounds smoother than before.
And another helpful habit is asking questions. Questions keep the conversation flowing and show the listener you're engaged. Even simple questions like why, or how did that feel, or what happened next, can build strong interaction.
Questions are also great for avoiding long pauses. Many learners stop speaking because they don't know what to say next. But if you ask a question, the conversation moves forward naturally and you stay involved without pressure.
Yes, questions are like bridges. They connect ideas and keep the rhythm alive. And rhythm is something you can only develop by practicing conversation, not by studying in silence.
Another thing that helps is shadowing conversations. When learners repeat parts of dialogues like this podcast, they train their mouth muscles, their listening skills, and their natural speaking patterns at the same time. It's one of the most effective fluency exercises.
Shadowing is powerful because it gives you the feeling of speaking in real time. You're not stopping to translate or check grammar. You're just following the flow. And after a while, your brain starts building its own flow too.
And even if learners don't have a partner, they can still practice by recording themselves. When you record your voice, you become more aware of your pronunciation, your speed, and your clarity. Then you can adjust and improve over time.
Yes, recording yourself is underrated. It's like having a mirror for your English skills. You hear what you sound like, and that awareness helps you reach the next level.
And with all these methods, conversation, shadowing, asking questions, paraphrasing, learners can create a holistic practice routine that strengthens every part of fluency.
And the more they practice, the easier it becomes to stay in English mentally. That's an important shift. When your mind can stay in English without switching back to your native language, you start communicating with much more confidence and much less effort.
And staying in English is something we're going to explore more in this conversation because it connects directly to fluency development.
Staying in English is actually a mental habit. At first, learners may only stay in English for a few seconds before switching back to their native language in their minds. But with more conversation practice, that time slowly increases. Eventually, you can stay in English for minutes at a time without even noticing this shift.
And that's when real fluency becomes noticeable. It's not that you suddenly become perfect. It's that your brain stops fighting the language. It accepts English as a natural mode of communication. That acceptance only happens through repeated interaction, not memorization.
Right? And one helpful technique is to think out loud in English during everyday activities. For example, when you're cooking, you can describe what you're doing. When you're walking, you can talk through your plans for the day. These small moments add extra conversation practice into your routine.
Yes, and those mini conversations build fluency because they give your brain micro-training sessions. You're forming sentences, connecting ideas, and practicing rhythm without pressure. That's often easier than having a long conversation with someone else.
Another useful skill is learning how to keep going even when you don't know a word. Native speakers do this constantly. If they forget a word, they explain it. They describe it. They talk around it. This is not a weakness. It's a communication strategy.
And that strategy keeps your fluency alive. The moment learners stop and think too long, their rhythm breaks. But if they keep speaking, even with simple words, they maintain momentum. Fluency is about movement, not complexity.
And movement helps build confidence. When you realize you can survive a conversation without knowing every word, you feel more relaxed. And a relaxed speaker is always more fluent.
True. Relaxation reduces mental pressure. When learners are tense, they think too much about correctness. But when they're calm, they think more about communication. And communication is the real goal.
And another important part of conversational fluency is learning to express opinions. Many learners feel unsure when sharing their thoughts. But expressing opinions is part of almost every conversation. Practicing simple structures like I think, in my opinion, and I believe helps you participate naturally.
And opinions allow conversations to grow. When you share your thoughts, the other person responds with their own, creating a deeper exchange. Even beginners can do this with simple language, and over time, the complexity increases naturally.
Exactly. And once learners start expressing opinions comfortably, they become more confident joining real conversations in the world at work, with friends, or online.
And that confidence is something we'll continue building as we explore even more techniques for developing fluency through conversation practice.
Another technique I really encourage learners to use is connecting sentences instead of speaking in short, separate pieces. Beginners often say one sentence, stop, then think, then say another. But fluency grows when you connect ideas with simple linking words like and, because, so, or but. These small connectors make your speech smoother without requiring advanced grammar.
Yes, and once learners get comfortable with basic connectors, they can start using slightly more advanced ones like however, on the other hand, or for example. But even the simplest connectors can make a huge difference in how natural your English sounds. You don't need complicated language, you just need continuous language.
Continuous language is the key. Even if the vocabulary is simple, connected sentences make your speech feel fluid. And the more you practice connecting your thoughts in English, the easier it becomes to speak without long pauses.
Another area that helps build fluency is learning common conversational phrases. Things like that makes sense, I see what you mean, I agree with that, or I am not sure about that. These ready-made expressions give you tools to respond quickly in conversation.
And quick responses help maintain the rhythm of speaking. When you have these phrases in your mind, you don't freeze. You can react immediately. And that immediate reaction is part of sounding fluent even at a beginner level.
Exactly. Fluency isn't only about advanced vocabulary. It's also about speed, clarity, and smooth interaction. These conversational phrases act like shortcuts that help you stay engaged without overthinking your grammar.
And something else I want learners to remember is that fluency changes depending on the topic. You might feel fluent talking about your daily routine, but not fluent discussing technology or travel. That's normal. Fluency is topic-based, and it expands gradually as you learn new areas.
That's such an important point. Learners sometimes think they're failing because they're fluent in one topic but struggle with another. But that isn't failure, that's development. You become fluent topic by topic, not all at once. And conversation practice exposes you to different themes, helping you grow in all directions.
And the more topics you explore, the more vocabulary you collect naturally. You don't have to memorize long lists. You learn words in context, during real conversations, which makes them easier to remember and easier to use later.
Exactly. And context matters because it shows you how words behave in real sentences. You hear how words connect, how tone works, and how ideas flow. All of these elements build your fluency piece by piece.
And that's something we'll keep digging into as we continue this conversation on developing fluency through consistent, meaningful practice.
Another element we should highlight is the importance of repetition. Not memorizing, but repeating the same types of conversations in different ways. When you talk about your day-to-day, and then talk about it again tomorrow, and again next week, your brain becomes faster at forming the same patterns. That speed becomes fluency.
Yes, repetition in real speaking builds automaticity. Automaticity means you can produce language without consciously thinking about every word. And the only way to reach that state is by repeating similar structures in actual conversations. It's the same way athletes train, they repeat movements until they become natural.
And something else that helps is noticing your improvement. Sometimes learners don't realize they're progressing because the changes feel small. But if you compare your English today with your English 6 months ago, you'll usually see a big difference. Fluency is built from hundreds of small improvements over time.
Definitely, progress isn't always dramatic, but it's steady. And noticing that progress keeps you motivated. When you feel motivated, you practice more. And when you practice more, you become even more fluent. It becomes a cycle of growth.
Another thing learners can do is focus on the flow of an idea, not the individual words. If you think in terms of ideas, general meaning, main message, you'll find it easier to speak. You won't get stuck searching for perfect vocabulary. You'll just communicate.
And communicating ideas is what conversation is for. Native speakers don't think about every word they say. They think about the idea they want to express, and the words come automatically. Practicing conversation helps you build that same instinct.
And while you're building that instinct, don't be afraid of slower speaking. Many learners think fluent speech must be fast, but fluency is actually clarity plus smoothness. A slow, smooth speaker is more fluent than a fast, broken one.
Exactly. Pace yourself. If you try to speak too quickly, your brain gets overwhelmed. But if you speak at a comfortable speed, you maintain control. And control leads to confidence, which leads to smoother language.
And another technique that helps is strategic pausing. Not long pauses from hesitation, but short, purposeful pauses between ideas. These help you organize your thoughts and help listeners understand you better.
Those pauses make your speech more natural. Even native speakers pause briefly to structure their sentences. Using pauses intentionally is part of conversational fluency, and anyone can practice it.
And as we keep exploring these techniques, we'll continue showing learners how small adjustments in conversation practice can lead to big improvements in fluency over time.
Another helpful idea for building fluency is expanding your answers. just a little bit more each time you speak. Many beginners give very short replies like yes, no, or I don't know. But if you add one extra sentence, you instantly sound more fluent. For example, instead of saying my day was good, you can say, my day was good because I finished my work early. That small extension makes a huge difference.
Yes, adding one more detail is a simple but powerful technique. You don't need to tell a long story. You just need to give a little more information than the basic answer. Over time, these extra details become natural, and your sentences become longer without effort.
And to help with that, it's useful to practice thinking in mini paragraphs. A mini paragraph is just 2 or 3 connected sentences about the same idea. For example, if someone asks about your weekend, you can say what you did, how you felt, and why it was meaningful. That's already a small paragraph in conversation form.
That's a great approach because it teaches learners to organize their ideas. When you can group your thoughts, your speech becomes smoother. You're not jumping randomly. You're moving through a clear structure, and fluency grows from structure.
And speaking of structure, learners can also use simple frameworks to guide their conversations. For example, the past, present, future framework works for almost any topic. You can talk about what happened before, what's happening now, and what you plan next. This gives your speech direction and keeps you talking without pressure.
That framework is especially helpful for beginners because it creates a natural flow. Even if your grammar isn't perfect, listeners can follow your story easily. And the more you use these frameworks, the more automatic they become.
Another point I want to mention is the value of listening to yourself as you speak. Not judging yourself, but observing your own flow. Ask yourself simple questions. Am I pausing too long? Am I connecting my sentences? Am I speaking too fast? This gentle awareness helps you adjust in real time.
Yes, awareness without pressure is the key. Some learners become too critical of themselves, and that creates anxiety. But if you simply notice your habits and adjust them slowly, you can improve your fluency without stressing about perfection.
And improving fluency also means becoming comfortable with uncertainty. In conversations, you won't always know what the other person will say. You won't always know every word. But being okay with that uncertainty allows you to respond more naturally. Fluency grows when you relax into the unknown.
And that's something learners don't often hear. Fluency is not about control. It's about flexibility. When you become flexible with language, able to describe things in different ways, able to continue even when confused, you start sounding much more fluent.
And flexibility is a skill we'll continue exploring as we move further into this conversation on developing fluency through consistent, meaningful practice.
Flexibility also develops when learners expose themselves to different speaking environments. For example, talking to someone who speaks slowly feels easy, but speaking with someone who talks a bit faster challenges your brain in a good way. It stretches your listening, and it teaches you to respond under a little bit of pressure. That kind of challenge builds stronger fluency over time.
Yes, and switching between different conversation partners is incredibly effective. Each person has a different style. Some use short sentences, some use longer ones, some explain things directly, others add details. When you experience these variations, your brain becomes more adaptable. And adaptability is one of the hidden engines of fluency.
Another technique many learners forget about is prediction. When you listen to someone, try predicting what they might say next. Not perfectly, of course, but just anticipating the type of answer or the direction of the conversation. This keeps your mind active, and an active mind responds more smoothly.
Prediction is great because it trains your listening and speaking at the same time. Your brain starts preparing potential responses, so when it's your turn to speak, you already have ideas ready. That reduces the long pauses that many learners worry about.
And speaking of reducing pauses, practicing thinking ahead helps too. Instead of focusing only on the sentence you're saying right now, let a tiny part of your brain prepare the beginning of your next idea. It doesn't have to be detailed, just a direction. That small preparation keeps your flow steady.
Another aspect we should talk about is emotional fluency. When learners speak English with confidence, curiosity, or enthusiasm, their voice naturally becomes clearer and more expressive. Emotional engagement pushes your language forward because your goal becomes communication, not perfection.
Yes, and emotions create connection. Conversation isn't only about exchanging information, it's about sharing feelings, reactions, and perspectives. When learners feel comfortable expressing their emotions, even simple ones, they automatically sound more fluent.
And part of emotional fluency is learning how to respond naturally to someone else's story. Instead of giving short, flat answers, you can respond with interest or reflection. For example, saying "that sounds challenging" or "I've experienced something similar" keeps the conversation alive and shows engagement.
Engagement builds flow, and flow builds fluency. When two people stay mentally present in a conversation, the language moves more smoothly. There's less pressure, less hesitation, and more natural movement from one idea to another.
And that natural movement is something learners can practice intentionally. When you speak, think of your ideas as stepping stones. Each stone leads you to the next, and you don't have to jump far, just one clear step at a time. That's how fluent conversations are built: small steps, connected smoothly.
And as we continue unfolding this topic, we'll keep guiding learners through even more practical ways to strengthen their fluency through everyday conversation practice. Another practical strategy for developing fluency is practicing predictable conversations. These are the kinds of conversations you already know will happen in daily life: ordering food, greeting someone, asking for directions, talking about plans. When you practice these predictable situations, you build confidence because you know what to expect, and that confidence helps you speak more smoothly.
Yes, predictable conversations are excellent training because they give you a safe structure. You know the typical questions and the typical responses, so your brain doesn't feel overwhelmed. Once you feel comfortable with these basic situations, you can slowly add variety or try more complex topics.
And once you're comfortable with predictable situations, you can start practicing spontaneous conversations. Even short, spontaneous exchanges challenge your brain in a healthy way. They force you to react, not prepare. That reaction builds fluency faster than memorizing phrases.
Exactly. Spontaneous speaking pushes you to use English in real time. You have to think, respond, and adjust instantly. And even if you make mistakes, those mistakes are valuable because they highlight exactly where you need more practice.
And that's something learners often misunderstand. They think mistakes are signs of failure, but mistakes are actually signs of progress. They show you are experimenting with language instead of staying silent.
Another point worth mentioning is the importance of speaking with different people if possible. Every person has a unique speaking style, vocabulary level, and rhythm. When you expose yourself to many speaking styles, your listening becomes sharper and your speaking becomes more adaptable.
Yes, talking to different people helps you avoid depending on just one communication style. You start learning how to understand different accents, different speeds, and different ways of expressing ideas. This adaptability is a huge part of fluency.
And even if learners don't have access to many people, they can still build variation by listening to different voices in podcasts, videos, or audio lessons. Listening to a wide range of speakers builds your ability to process English more naturally.
And with better listening comes better speaking. When your ears become used to natural English, your mouth begins to imitate those patterns automatically. It becomes easier to form sentences the way native speakers do.
Another useful technique is speaking with intention. Before starting a conversation practice session, ask yourself what you want to focus on. Maybe today you want to practice longer sentences. Maybe you want to practice expressing opinions. Maybe you want to practice asking follow-up questions. Having a focus helps your practice feel purposeful.
Purposeful practice accelerates fluency because it gives your brain a clear goal. Instead of just talking randomly, you are training a specific skill. And when you train intentionally, your progress becomes more noticeable.
And intentional practice doesn't have to be complicated. Even choosing one small goal per session makes a big difference over time.
And these small, consistent choices are what push your fluency forward, step by step, as we continue exploring more ways to strengthen conversational confidence and natural expression. Another aspect of conversational fluency that often goes unnoticed is intonation. Intonation is the rise and fall of your voice when you speak. Even if your vocabulary is simple, good intonation makes your speech sound natural and confident. When learners speak with flat intonation, their sentences feel mechanical. But when they add natural rise and fall, everything becomes clearer and more engaging.
Yes, and the great thing is that you don't need advanced skills to improve your intonation. You can practice by listening closely to conversations, podcasts, or videos and noticing how speakers change their tone. You don't have to copy perfectly, just paying attention helps your brain absorb the pattern. Over time, your own speech becomes smoother.
And another thing that supports fluency is learning to respond naturally. When someone shares something with you, you can react with short, simple responses before giving your full answer. For example, saying "that's interesting" or "I understand" gives you a moment to think while still keeping the conversation active.
Yes, those natural responses buy you time. They prevent the conversation from feeling broken or silent. They're small tools, but they help learners maintain flow without pressure. And when learners use these responses often, their conversations feel more natural.
Another technique is to practice real-life scenarios. For example, ordering food, asking for help, explaining a problem, or describing your weekend plans. Practicing these everyday situations prepares you for real conversations and builds confidence quickly because you know exactly what to expect.
And real-life scenarios also teach you the patterns of common interactions. Once you learn the typical phrases for a situation, you can use them repeatedly. That repetition makes your English smoother and helps you develop fluent habits without forcing yourself to memorize long scripts.
Speaking of habits, creating a daily speaking habit, even a short one, can make a dramatic difference. Just 5 minutes of speaking out loud every day helps your brain stay connected to English. Consistency is more powerful than long, occasional practice.
And daily practice doesn't need to be complicated. You can describe what you see. You can talk about your plans. You can talk about your goals. You can reflect on your day. These simple topics are perfect because they're familiar, and familiarity helps you speak more naturally.
And when learners feel more natural, they stop translating in their minds. They start forming sentences directly in English, and that shift is one of the strongest signs of growing fluency. It's the moment when English begins to feel more comfortable and less like a school subject.
Exactly. And another element that strengthens fluency is learning to speak even when you're unsure of your grammar. If you wait to be perfect, you'll never practice. But if you speak with the grammar you currently have, your fluency grows. Then your accuracy improves gradually as you continue.
And that's one of the biggest misunderstandings many learners have. They think accuracy must come first. But fluency actually comes from using the language, not from waiting until you know everything. You learn accuracy through use, not before use.
And as we go deeper into this topic, we'll continue sharing more ways learners can build fluency through simple, meaningful, and consistent conversation practice.
Another technique that really helps learners grow their fluency is becoming comfortable with rephrasing. Rephrasing means saying the same idea in a different way. For example, if you can't remember a specific word, you can explain it using simpler language. This skill keeps your conversation flowing even when your vocabulary is limited.
Yes, and rephrasing is something native speakers use constantly. If they forget a word, they don't stop the conversation. They describe it. They say things like, "It's similar to," or "It's the thing you use when," or "It's like a." These simple structures help you communicate even without perfect vocabulary. And that is a true sign of fluency.
And as learners rephrase more often, they become less afraid of forgetting words. That fear can cause long pauses or silence. But when you know you can still communicate, even with simple language, speaking becomes much more relaxed and natural.
Exactly. And relaxed speaking is always more fluent. Fluency is not about having every word ready. It's about staying calm enough to keep communicating. Panic breaks fluency, but comfort keeps it alive.
Another strategy is becoming familiar with conversation fillers that help you maintain rhythm without rushing. Not expressions like a or but meaningful fillers such as well, actually, let me think, or I guess. These help you stay in control of your speech while giving yourself a second to organize your thoughts.
And these fillers make your speech sound more natural because native speakers use them all the time. They're not mistakes, they're tools. They help you think while still participating in the conversation, which is a major part of sounding fluent.
And I think learners should also practice switching perspectives smoothly. For example, you can talk about your own experience, then relate it to someone else's, then connect it to a general idea. This movement between personal, social, and general viewpoints makes your conversation richer.
Yes, and that ability to shift perspective helps you express more complex thoughts without needing advanced grammar. You can say things like, "in my case," "for many people," or "in general." These phrases guide the listener and help you build fluency through organized expression.
And fluency also grows when learners practice answering questions in multiple ways. Instead of giving one straightforward answer, they can add explanation, an example, and maybe a short reflection. This makes their speaking more dynamic and less repetitive.
Adding a reflection, even a small one, shows deeper language control. For example, after answering a question, you can add, "I think this matters because," or "this made me realize that." These simple reflections help extend the conversation naturally.
And natural extension is essential for fluency. Many conversations end quickly because learners don't know how to keep them going. But if you add small reflections, examples, or personal thoughts, the conversation grows by itself.
Another useful technique is practicing prediction. When you listen to someone, try to predict what they might say next or what direction the conversation is going. This keeps your mind active and helps you prepare your responses, which increases your fluency.
And prediction helps you stay engaged. When your brain is actively listening and preparing, your responses become faster and smoother. It's a mental skill that develops through consistent conversation practice.
And we'll continue exploring more ways to build fluency, focusing on how learners can strengthen their thinking, speaking, and interaction skills through steady conversation practice.
Something else that truly strengthens fluency is learning how to predict conversation patterns. Most conversations follow familiar structures: greetings, sharing information, asking follow-up questions, giving opinions, and reacting to the other person. When learners understand these patterns, they can participate more confidently because they're not entering a conversation blind.
Yes, and once you recognize these patterns, you start anticipating what might come next. For example, if someone tells you about their weekend, you can predict that a follow-up question like "what about you?" might appear. Anticipation helps your brain prepare language faster, which increases fluency over time.
And building this anticipation skill becomes easier when you expose yourself to many different conversations. Listening to podcasts, watching interviews, and observing real dialogues teaches you the rhythm and structure of natural communication.
Another technique that helps learners become more fluent is simplifying their language when they get stuck. Some people freeze because they try to explain something using advanced vocabulary. But if you replace complex words with simpler ones, you can keep speaking smoothly. Fluency is about flow, not complexity.
Exactly. You don't lose fluency by using simple words. You actually increase your fluency because you stay in motion. Over time, as your vocabulary grows, you naturally start using more varied expressions, but the foundation is smooth communication, not fancy vocabulary.
And speaking of vocabulary, a great method for learning new words through conversation is noticing repeated expressions the other person uses. When someone uses a phrase several times, your brain begins to pick it up naturally. You start hearing the pattern, understanding the context, and eventually using it yourself without memorizing.
Vocabulary learned through real conversation sticks much better than vocabulary memorized from a list. The emotional context, the interaction, and the natural rhythm help your brain store the word in a more permanent way.
Another essential part of conversational fluency is learning how to clarify things politely. If you don't understand something, you can say, "Could you explain that?" Or "What do you mean by that?" Or "Can you give me an example?" These phrases help you stay in the conversation instead of shutting down.
And using clarification strategies shows confidence. It communicates to the listener that you are engaged and willing to understand. Conversation is a two-way process, and fluency includes the ability to ask for help without embarrassment.
And I think that's something a lot of learners struggle with. They worry they'll look weak if they ask questions. But actually, strong communicators ask questions all the time. It keeps the conversation active, clear, and meaningful.
Another skill that supports fluency is summarizing what the other person said. You don't need to give a long summary, just a simple restatement like, "So you mean," or "If I understand correctly." This helps ensure you're on the same page and gives your brain more practice processing English in real time.
And summarizing also helps conversations move forward smoothly. When you show that you understand, the other person feels encouraged to continue, and the interaction becomes more natural. This natural flow is one of the strongest signs of developing fluency.
And as we continue, we're going to dive even deeper into the types of habits and conversational techniques that help learners build fluency step by step, without pressure and without needing perfect grammar. Another technique that really helps learners move toward natural fluency is predicting what the other person might say next. This doesn't mean guessing the whole sentence, but simply preparing your mind for possible directions. When your brain anticipates ideas, you respond faster because you're not starting from zero every time.
Yes, prediction plays a big role in fluent listening and fluent speaking. When you listen to someone, your mind starts forming possible answers automatically. This mental preparation shortens your reaction time, which makes your speech sound smoother. It's a skill that grows naturally the more conversations you have.
And prediction becomes easier when you're familiar with common conversational patterns. For example, if someone tells you about a problem, a natural response is to ask how they feel or what they plan to do. If someone shares good news, a natural response is to congratulate them or ask for more details. Recognizing these patterns helps conversations flow effortlessly.
Another important skill for fluency is learning how to clarify when you don't understand something. Many learners panic when they miss a word or a phrase, but fluent speakers simply ask for clarification. Phrases like "Could you explain that?" Or what do you mean? Keep the conversation moving without embarrassment.
And asking for clarification doesn't make you look less fluent. In fact, it makes you look more confident and more communicative. Fluent speakers do it all the time because clarity is more important than pretending to understand.
Right? And clarity leads to better conversations. When both people understand each other well, the dialogue becomes smoother, richer, and more enjoyable. And enjoyable conversations create positive experiences, which encourage you to keep practicing.
And the emotional side of fluency is something learners often overlook. When you enjoy the process, your brain relaxes. When your brain relaxes, language flows more naturally. Stress closes the door. Enjoyment opens it.
Absolutely. Enjoyment increases confidence, and confidence increases fluency. That's why learners should choose conversation topics they genuinely like. If you enjoy talking about food, talk about food. If you enjoy talking about music, talk about music. When you care about the topic, your words come more easily.
And once you feel comfortable with the topics you enjoy, you can slowly challenge yourself with new ones. This gradual expansion builds fluency without overwhelming you. Learning becomes a natural process, not a forced one.
Another helpful mindset is seeing conversation as cooperation, not performance. Many learners think they need to perform well when speaking English, but real conversations are cooperative. Both people work together. Both people support each other. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to participate.
Participation is the heart of fluency. When you participate regularly, you give your brain opportunities to improve. When you avoid conversation out of fear, you block your progress. Showing up consistently is already a big step toward becoming fluent.
And one more thing that supports fluency is curiosity. Ask questions because you're curious, not because you're practicing. Respond because you want to know more, not because you're trying to be perfect. When curiosity leads the way, fluency follows.
Curiosity makes conversations feel alive. And when a conversation feels alive, your language becomes more alive too. You start expressing opinions, sharing experiences, and connecting ideas in a more natural way.
And this connection between you, the listener, and the language is what turns English from something you study into something you live.
And as we continue this conversation, we'll keep diving deeper into the habits, techniques, and mindsets that help learners build fluency through consistent, meaningful speaking practice. Another part of becoming a fluent speaker is learning how to predict language. When you listen to someone speak, your brain automatically tries to guess what they might say next. This prediction skill helps you respond faster because your mind is already preparing possible answers. The more conversations you join, the stronger this prediction ability becomes.
Yes, and prediction doesn't mean knowing the exact words. It means understanding the general direction of the conversation. For example, if someone says, "I had a difficult day," you can predict they might talk about work, stress, or something unexpected that happened. That helps you prepare your next question or comment, making your responses smoother.
And prediction also helps reduce fear. Many learners freeze because they're waiting for the other person to finish speaking before they start thinking about their answer. But fluent speakers think ahead. They listen, but they also anticipate. Practicing this skill makes conversations feel less intimidating.
Another technique that supports fluency is using familiar sentence starters. Things like "the reason is," "what I mean is," "to be honest," or "for me personally." These starters give you a strong beginning, so you don't waste time searching for how to start your sentence. Once you begin clearly, the rest of the idea flows more easily.
And sentence starters are extremely helpful when your mind goes blank. Instead of panicking, you use a familiar expression as a bridge. This keeps the conversation moving and helps your brain catch up. It's similar to having tools in a toolkit. You pick the one you need to keep the flow going.
Speaking of tools, another important one is practicing common conversation patterns. For example, the pattern statement, explanation, example. If you use this pattern, you naturally speak longer and clearer. You state your idea, explain why, and give a simple example. This structure works in everyday conversations and makes your speech sound more organized.
And it also helps reduce hesitation. When you know a pattern, you don't have to create everything from zero. You just follow the structure. This allows you to speak more confidently, even if you're still learning new vocabulary.
Another area that supports fluency is emotional engagement. When you talk about topics you genuinely care about, your words come more easily. Emotion activates memory, motivation, and clarity. That's why learners often sound more fluent when discussing hobbies, passions, or meaningful experiences.
Yes, and choosing topics that feel personal or enjoyable makes practice sessions more dynamic. It's much easier to build fluency when the conversation feels natural instead of forced. Even beginners can talk fluently about things they truly like because the ideas are already familiar.
And another point worth mentioning, that fluency improves when you learn to summarize. Summaries force you to condense ideas into clear, simple language, which strengthens your ability to express meaning efficiently. When you can summarize something in your own words, you're practicing one of the core skills of conversational fluency.
Summarizing also teaches you to focus on the most important parts of an idea. This reduces overwhelm and makes communication clearer. You start noticing the essential points instead of getting lost in details. And in real-world conversations, clear summaries create smooth, engaging dialogue.
Something else learners can practice is responding with short reflections. For example, when someone shares something, you can say, "That sounds challenging," or "I can imagine how that felt," or "That's interesting." These reflections keep the conversation warm, natural, and connected.
Yes, and reflections are part of active listening. When you show that you truly understand the speaker, the conversation becomes more comfortable for both sides. And comfort naturally boosts fluency because you're not stressed, you're participating.
And as we continue this session, we'll keep uncovering more practical strategies that help learners speak with clarity, confidence, and natural flow.
Another aspect that really strengthens fluency is learning to anticipate common conversation patterns. Most conversations follow similar shapes. For example, someone shares an experience, then the other person reacts, asks a question, or shares a similar story. When learners become familiar with these patterns, they can respond more easily because they know what usually comes next.
Yes, recognizing patterns reduces the mental effort of speaking. Instead of worrying about what to say, you can rely on the natural flow of a conversation. And once you feel that flow, your English becomes smoother because you're not starting from zero every time.
And understanding patterns also helps you avoid freezing in the middle of a conversation. If you know typical responses like "that sounds interesting" or "really, what happened next?" or "I've had a similar experience," you never run out of things to say.
Those reaction phrases are incredibly useful. They fill the space while your brain prepares your next idea. That small buffer keeps the conversation active and helps you stay confident, even if you're still thinking.
Another tip is to focus on the verbs you use most often. Verbs are the foundation of your sentences. If you master common verbs like go, do, make, want, need, feel, and try, you can talk about almost anything at a basic level. Fluency starts with strong foundations, not rare vocabulary.
Exactly. And strong foundations allow you to express more complex ideas using simple language. Learners sometimes think they need advanced vocabulary to sound fluent, but that isn't true. Fluency is using what you already know efficiently and clearly.
And sometimes fluency grows faster when you stop chasing difficult words and instead practice expressing big ideas with simple words. If you can explain your thoughts clearly, you already sound fluent, even with basic vocabulary.
Another helpful technique is practicing transitions. Transitions are the words that guide your listener from one idea to the next. Words like first, then, after that, finally, or also help organize your thoughts. When your ideas are organized, you sound fluent, even if your grammar isn't perfect.
Organization is an underrated part of fluency. When your ideas are clear to you, they become clear to your listener. And clarity always sounds fluent.
And something else that supports clarity is practicing short storytelling. Storytelling doesn't have to be complicated. Even telling a simple event from your day where you went, what happened, and how you felt helps you practice sequencing ideas in English.
And sequencing ideas is a core fluency skill. It teaches you how to move from point A to point B without stopping. That movement creates flow, and flow is fluency.
Another thing learners should remember is that fluency isn't measured by speed. Some of the clearest, most confident speakers are not fast. They're steady. They choose their words with calmness, not panic. And that calm tone can actually make your English sound more professional and more natural.
Yes, steady speech is powerful. It shows control. It shows confidence. And it gives your brain enough time to think clearly, which leads to smoother sentences. Fast speaking without control doesn't help fluency. Controlled speaking does.
And to build that control, it's helpful to practice with time pressure, but in small moments. For example, describe an object around you for 10 seconds without stopping. Or explain what you did this morning in 15 seconds. These micro exercises train your brain to think quickly and speak continuously.
And they also help remove hesitation. When you speak without stopping, even for a short burst, you train your brain to keep moving forward instead of pausing after every sentence. That momentum is what conversational fluency feels like.
And as we continue this conversation, we can explore even more techniques that help you build natural fluency through consistent, meaningful speaking practice.
Another key factor is learning how to respond to unexpected questions. In real conversations, you won't always be prepared. Someone may ask something you've never thought about. Fluency grows when you learn to give simple, honest answers instead of panicking.
Yes, answers don't have to be perfect. If you don't know what to say, you can start with something general like "I'm not sure, but I think," or "That's an interesting question." These starter phrases help you begin your sentence while your brain prepares the real content.
Those starter phrases reduce the stress of speaking. They give you time to think while still participating in the conversation, and that participation keeps your fluency alive.
Another helpful technique is practicing thinking aloud. If you get a question and you're unsure how to answer, you can think aloud in English by saying something like "Let me think about that for a moment." This shows confidence and gives you time to form your ideas.
And thinking aloud is also a good way to practice staying in English mentally. Instead of switching languages in your head to plan your sentence, you stay in English the whole time. That habit is powerful for fluency development.
Another technique is using examples. Examples make your speech richer and more naturally detailed. Even simple examples can transform your answer from short to fluid. For example, if you're talking about learning English, you can say, for example, "I practice with short podcasts every morning." It's a small addition, but it makes your speech more natural.
Examples give your listener something concrete to imagine, which makes your speaking more engaging. And when your speech is engaging, conversations flow more easily. That flow makes you sound more fluent.
And speaking of flow, learners can practice by imagining mini dialogues with themselves. Pretend someone is asking you questions about your day, your hobbies, or your plans. Then answer them out loud. It may feel unusual at first, but it's extremely effective.
Yes, self-dialogue is one of the most accessible forms of practice. You don't need a partner. You just need your voice and your imagination. And because you're controlling both sides of the conversation, you can challenge yourself with different types of questions.
That kind of practice builds your ability to respond quickly, which is exactly what fluency requires. The more you practice spontaneous speaking, the more natural your real conversations will become.
And spontaneous speaking is something we'll continue exploring, along with many other techniques that help learners develop smooth, confident English through regular conversation practice.
Something else that's really valuable for fluency is learning how to summarize. Summarizing is when you take a longer idea and express it in a shorter, clearer version. This skill helps you stay focused during conversations and express yourself more confidently.
Yes, summarizing teaches you to identify the main point of what you want to say. When you know the main point, you speak with more clarity. And clarity makes your English sound more fluent.
Another useful habit is paraphrasing what the other person says. For example, if someone says they're stressed from work, you can respond with "So you're feeling tired because you've been working a lot lately." This shows understanding and strengthens your ability to express the same idea in different words.
Paraphrasing is excellent for fluency because it forces your brain to reorganize information in English. You're not just repeating, you're transforming the meaning. That transformation deepens your language skills.
And related to that is the skill of expanding a conversation. If someone gives you a short answer, you can ask a follow-up question or share a related experience. This keeps the conversation alive and gives you more opportunities to practice speaking.
Expanding conversations is something many learners struggle with at first, but it becomes easier once you understand that most conversations grow through curiosity. If you stay curious, you'll always find something to ask or share.
Curiosity is a great engine for a fluency. When you're genuinely interested, you speak more. You listen more, you interact more, and that interaction builds your skills naturally.
And as we keep moving through this topic, we'll continue showing how curiosity, practice, structure, and confidence all work together to help learners develop stronger, smoother fluency through conversation.
Another habit that truly supports fluency is learning to predict the flow of a conversation. Even though you can't know exactly what someone will say, you can often guess the general direction. When you start noticing patterns like common follow-up questions, typical reactions, or predictable comments, you prepare your mind to respond more quickly. That mental preparation makes your speech faster and smoother.
And that's such a powerful shift. When you can predict parts of a conversation, even at a beginner level, you reduce the number of surprises. Your brain doesn't have to work as hard because you already expect the next step. This reduces hesitation and builds confidence, which directly improves fluency.
Predicting language also helps you understand people better. You catch ideas faster because you're not only listening to words, you're following the logic of the conversation. And when you follow the logic, your responses become more natural and more connected.
Speaking of connection, another technique that helps fluency grow is using your personal experiences as examples. When you link a topic to something real in your own life, the language becomes easier to produce. Instead of searching for words, you're describing something familiar. Familiar ideas come out more fluently.
That's true for beginners, intermediate learners, and even advanced learners. When you personalize the language, you stop translating. You start expressing. And expression is the heart of fluency.
And something learners often forget is that every conversation strengthens your listening memory. You start recognizing patterns you've heard before. You start remembering phrases that repeat. And you begin using those same phrases automatically in your own speech.
Yes, automatic recall is one of the strongest signs of fluency. When you can use a phrase without thinking about it, it means the language has moved from memory into instinct. And instinct is what allows people to speak comfortably in real time.
And that comfort grows the more you practice. The more you speak, listen, repeat, and stay engaged, the more fluent you become. Fluency isn't a sudden achievement, it's a continuous process that expands with every interaction.
And the most important part is staying consistent. Even small conversations every day build more fluency than one big conversation once a week. Fluency is formed piece by piece, sentence by sentence, moment by moment.
And that brings us naturally to the end of this segment. We've explored how conversation practice shapes fluency, how rhythm develops, how confidence grows, and how expression becomes more natural over time.
And we'll continue this topic in our next part of the episode. For now, thanks for staying with us in this ongoing fluency journey.
Bye, everyone.
Automaticity. Meaning, the ability to do something naturally and quickly without thinking about it. Daily speaking practice helps you develop automaticity in forming English sentences. After months of training, the athlete's movements showed complete automaticity. Paraphrasing. Meaning, expressing the same idea using different words. When you forget a word, paraphrasing helps you keep the conversation flowing. The teacher asks the students to paraphrase the sentence to show understanding. Flexibility. Meaning, the ability to adapt or change easily when facing new situations. Language learners need flexibility to explain ideas in different ways. Her flexibility helped her adjust quickly to living in a new country. Uncertainty. Meaning, a situation where you don't know what will happen or what someone will say. Accepting uncertainty makes conversations easier and less stressful. The company paused its plans because of uncertainty in the market. Framework. Meaning, a basic structure or system that helps organize ideas or information. Using a simple framework like past, present, future helps learners speak more fluently. The project team created a framework to guide their planning process. Awareness. Meaning, knowing or noticing something about yourself or your surroundings. Developing awareness of your speaking speed helps improve fluency. His awareness of cultural differences made communication smoother. Momentum. Meaning, continuous progress or movement that becomes easier to maintain over time. Speaking regularly helps you build momentum in your language learning. After a few successful days of study, she gained momentum and kept going. Adaptability. Meaning, the skill of adjusting easily to new challenges or changes. Adaptability is important when conversations move in unexpected directions. His adaptability made him successful in many different work environments. Interaction. Meaning, communication or exchange between two or more people. Real interaction with others is essential for developing fluency. The app encourages interaction between students around the world. Gradually. Meaning, slowly and steadily over a period of time. Fluency improves gradually as you practice more conversations. The weather gradually became colder as winter approached.